Hello, everyone. In the previous week's video, we did a really nice little series kind of dedicated to my experiences flying the Cessna 172, as well as kind of the ins and outs and quirks. I enjoyed that so much, I said, you know what? We should probably do this with some of the other planes, including this lovely Cessna 182, which I actually have quite a bit of time in. I'm going to be flying probably next week, so it's always good to get some practice. Let's go ahead and get started. So this is going to be part one of a three-part series. The first part, of course, is going to be dedicated to kind of what is the deal with this plane, as well as kind of getting it going. Obviously, this version is a very modern version of the Cessna 172, or actually a turbocharged version here. This is the Carinado model, by the way. And we don't have that capability in the airplane I fly. I fly a 182P, which, it's a bunch of spare parts and flying in formation, like a DC-3. But what we hope to do is go ahead and show you sort of the ins and outs, and I'll kind of give you some of the stories and some of the kind of weirdness about this plane, and I think you'll appreciate most of it. So let's go ahead and start with the basics here. The Cessna 182 is a much more powerful version of the Cessna 172. There's actually a lot of little things that you didn't notice. One thing, for example, is this wing's actually higher off the ground. It's one of those things when I first moved up to this plane, it shocked me how much higher this is off the ground. The other thing that people miss with the 182 is how large the tail is. The tail is very big. In the early 182s, it was actually substantially smaller, and that created some really big problems. The other thing that always shocks people when they first get in a 182, by the way, the seating's in the wrong position. You can't put your feet through there, is how much more room you have in the back. And one of the things my passengers always get a little confused with, because you can carry passengers in a 182, is just how unnaturally steep this angle feels. And when I sit here and actually look up with my head, I'll kind of zoom out to show you, you can see we're going uphill, and we're really going uphill. And you don't appreciate this until we go to land and take off, and you'll see exactly why. But the 182, basically 235 horsepower with the base versions. They have much larger versions. I know there's one that they actually managed to shove a 300 horsepower with an STC in here, which is a lot. The big thing is we have a heavier gross weight than a 172. Instead of our kind of measly 2550, we go up to 2950. And in this version, I believe, because it's a newer, I think we can go even higher than that. Yeah, we get 3,100 pounds, which is a lot of weight. That's an amazing amount of weight for a little plane like this. And it's actually pretty impressive that we can even manage things like that. Other fun little quirks about the 182, of course, is when you climb inside this thing. I love this. Where's the window actually works? Thank you. There's a window on the side. In earlier versions, did not have a window on the passenger side, which I always thought was kind of funny. Another thing that's kind of interesting and quirky about this plane, which you may have not noticed before, is the tools for getting fuel out of the wings. In the earlier version, of course, you basically had that one little sump that you stuck your little container into, and the blue fuel would come out, hopefully with no water in it. But the later versions of this actually have multiple points along the wing where you can go ahead and stick your little fuel strainer into it to confirm whether or not you have any water in your fuel. Probably problems they were having with water and fuel, and they missed it because it's got an angle to it, and maybe they didn't notice, and all that other good stuff. A couple of the fun things in the 182, which differentiated quite a bit. Presence of cowl flaps, that's a big change for folks. People probably notice right away. We have this beautiful swept propeller on the front, and we can also see that it's a three-bladed propeller, which is really nice because it's so much smoother than a Cessna 172. This thing is just butter. A lot of them had the Continental engines as well. Great thing about the Continentals is, man, they start up when you tell them to start up, and they shut down when you tell them to shut down. Another really fun thing, too, and very hard to see here, if you look very closely, you'll see this little metal tab. Our stall warning is now as opposed to like you get on the Cessna 172s. And yes, that's exactly what it sounds like. You can go look up videos of it. But that's an interesting, fun thing to do, because when you're doing your testing, if you go here and tap this, the battery's off, you have no stall warning. It seems kind of like, why would you do it that way? Another fun thing you'll probably observe, too, is even though there's a place to put your foot in this version, the older version, you have no place to put your feet. If you wanted to climb up here to put fuel inside of this thing, you'd actually go climbing like a monkey kind of climbing. It wasn't very pleasant to do. Other fun things, of course, in this plane, if I go all the way back here, is this gigantic tail. And, of course, sitting here on the ground, it would be sitting here like this right now if we didn't have our gust lock in place. It's just kind of one of those little flight simisms that nobody thinks about, really, which I don't know, it doesn't bother me, but I get it, but I'm not even gonna fight it. Ailerons in this thing are truly gigantic ailerons. I really feel the drag on this. And the flaps on this, as you can tell by this gigantic chunk of metal right here, are very heavy duty flaps. As a matter of fact, one of the first things we do after climbing in here and going, man, it smells like 1977 in here, is that we would actually climb in here, we'd go ahead and pop on the master battery real quick. You get a lot of warnings. We grab the flaps and we slam them down. This is also when you check your fuel quantities, but I said this is kind of a new version, so I'm not going to stress about that too much. Doing that, of course, the flaps on this thing are barn doors. The earlier versions went down to 40 degrees. The later versions only go down to 30 degrees, just because of how insanely affected the flaps really were. And as you can see, I shut the battery off too soon. and didn't actually let him go all the way down. So we got to turn that off. And again, you can see just how much of a chunk of metal that thing is and how much drag that creates looking at it from the front. That's going to give us all sorts of trouble. But isn't this incredible? Just the sheer amount of the basically huge speed brakes you have here. And you will not appreciate how much drag these create until you try to land this plane for the first time. So anyway, we've inspected the outside of the aircraft, checked our oil, we made sure I had our minimum of 9 quarts and everything like that. And we finally climb in here, looking comfortable. We plug our headphones in, the little headphone jack. It's kind of standard style over here. The parking brake on this plane does work, unlike some other planes. And of course, we climb in here. The window would be open if it was hot outside. It is not hot outside today. It's 40, probably 30 degrees in the Fahrenheit scale. It's cold enough. Of course, we check all our breakers and everything like that. We get all that ready to go. Everybody be nice and seated. Of course, you'd reach underneath your seat, and guess what? They did not model that. We do not have the click, 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 click. But what you don't see here is these little tiny holes right here. You actually have a little detent, a little almost like a metal ball bearing kind of a thing. And when you push your chair forward, you kind of lock into each one of these pins. And when you pull it forward the first time, there's a good chance that you're not going to get it in the pin. So what usually happens is during takeoff, you finally get it into the pin because of the sudden acceleration. So you go click, and you're like, oh God, because you're terrified for a second to end up in the back seat. But the problem is these chairs were so bad that they actually retrofit a little tensioning device that we don't see here because, again, this is a modern version of the 182. And what it actually does is it wraps around the bottom of the chair. If the chair suddenly goes back, the tensioner tightens and it prevents the chair from going any further back all at once, kind of a thing like that. Just to give you an idea of how sketchy these chairs were in the time and how they've improved quite drastically here. So anyway, we go ahead and climb in here. We'd go through a checklist. My big thing was briefing the passengers. The wonderful thing that I really, really liked about the 170 or 182 they have the dual shoulder harnesses like the fighter jets, as opposed to like this nice little kind of car one that you're kind of probably more used to. But I think that's more fun because you click it into the middle of your chest and it's just so much more satisfying until you go to lean forward the first time and then the pre-tensioner catches you and you go, oh! And you'll know exactly what I mean the first 10 times you try it. Another thing we're not seeing in this plane, which is realistic in the real world but not in the simulator, is you don't sit this high. If you actually look here, the headrest is here, your head is here. You actually sit down here. And the reason that's important is because when I sit down here, do you see how hard it is to see over the dash of this thing? This is a really, really high-nosed plane. And it surprised me. It's like you're in the plane. You're like, I think there's a landing out there somewhere, I think. And that's a real thing you don't get when you go ahead and do one of these and sit up so high. Of course, when you sit up this high, it's like I'm about that close to the ceiling here. This is a completely unrealistic seating position. Unless, of course, you're really tall, which I'm not very tall. So not that I'm short. I'm actually as average as they get. So anyway, that's kind of the fun bit. Let's get the sucker kind of going now. So what we do, of course, is we pop on the beacon lights. This is a beacon. We don't have a beacon light on this plane. Of course, in the old 182s, these switches aren't here. They're down here, but does not make that much of a difference. That's critical. Of course, we come over here and pop these two on. You're going to get all sorts of angry honks and stuff like that. We go ahead and engage the mixture. This lovely one, as you probably predicted, is the fuel injected. This is a turbocharged version of this plane, so it's a little different. So we'd go ahead and pop that one in, and of course, we'd have to engage the fuel pump, and we have to build up enough pressure to actually be successful. No, I love how it's flashing red. I appreciate that to death there. So coming down here, of course, we have all of our standard stuff. GPH is perfectly still at the moment. That's perfectly fine. So what we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and pop on the fuel pump, and we're going to push it forward, and then we're going to pull it back, and then go, oh, click, then push it forward, pull it back. And that's plenty. That's all we need to do. I'm going to go ahead and pull at the mixture handle. We're going to crack this just a tiny bit. And we're going to cross our fingers that when we crank this thing on, it'll catch right away. Of course, being a Continental, it's not hard. So one hand is going to be in here. One hand is going to be in here. One hand is going to be in here. Do the math. Man, that started sweet. That's actually very authentic for a 182. If you prime these things correctly, you go click, click, and then it's on. There's no hesitation whatsoever. They're absolutely fantastic motors on these things. So that's coming up. Everything looks good. We've got oil pressure right away. I can see oil temperatures coming up. Cylinder head temperatures flying up. It wouldn't go up that high, not on a winter day. Turbine temperature, we're going to leave that one alone for today, but I'm perfectly happy with all that. Next thing we do, of course, in the real plane is we turn on our electric trims. We would go ahead and set all those other items set up as well, kind of turning one thing off. One thing that we did not do that a lot of pilots will do is they'll actually set the fuel selector to one side and then they'll flip it to the other just to confirm that everything's feeding properly. And of course, our cowl flaps, we're going to snap them to the open position here because we don't want to be flying around with the cowl flaps kind of closed like that. It is a pretty cold day. We could technically leave the cowl flaps closed or open, but like it's one of the situations where it's like, just stick to procedure and it'll be perfectly fine. So this is a nice G1000 version of the 182. You could probably buy one of these new for, I don't know, 700,000 US, that's enough. That's enough. I can arm the standby battery. I think that's cool. We can arm that now. Of course, if we wanted to test our standby battery, we could just check it to make sure it's charged. What it is, which I'm fine. This is an expensive airplane compared to some of the planes that we've flown before. And I love the fact that I don't have to do anything with the autopilot. Like, it's already kind of like preset. One thing we would do, of course, in the real plane is you'd be very, very tempted to pull the cabin heat out. Of course, we don't do that during the ground because remember, we're taking air off the top of the engine, which is probably, with nice burnt oil smell and maybe a little bit of carbon monoxide. And giving this thing a tug, you don't want to do that when you're in the ground. You want to wait until you get a little airborne. I do have the window wide open on a nice cold winter day here. And of course, what I didn't do was yell for clear prop or anything like that. But that would be the time that you would do all that as well. So this is the warm-up phase. I also like to call this the make sure you're ready to fly phase. Oh, pressure is almost in the green. It would not do that. This needle wouldn't have even have moved yet. This will go up, but the oil temperature would be way, way down here on a day like this. But that's okay. So this is all set. So let's go ahead and dial in some navigation. Before I do that, though, I'm going to go ahead and pull the mixture handle way, 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 way out because we're sitting here with leaded fuel, and it's not very good for the engine to let that get in a bad way, so to speak. So let's go ahead and direct to. We're traveling over to, we're going up to Bedford today, which is up in Massachusetts, Lanscombe Field. I'm just going to press the enter key a couple of times. I'm going to press shut this one off. That looks pretty good to me. Boop. I'm going to go press activate. Okay, actually got to activate. See, I had a moment. Let's go ahead. Come on. You're going to do it. Yep. Welcome to Bedford 9, Bedford D, Bedford C. Clear. I hate it when I do that. So we're going to press the direct to button. We'll come in here. Try it again. KBED. I like that. That looks good to me. We're going to navigate here. Come on. Come on. Come on. You're going to do it for me. You're going to do it for me. I wonder if this is a new bug that they just introduced, because usually this is not that fitsy. You just bop the button and you're on your way, kind of a thing like that. There it goes. Haha, newbie mistake. So we're just going to press the GPS, and we're going to get that kind of pre-selected. Like I said, we're going about northeast today. Cruise altitude for us, we're just going to go 3,500 feet. And again, I like to set these things, especially with G1000s and G3000s. I kind of like to set the stuff on the ground, not when I get in the air. But a lot of times, based on your instrument clearance, you kind of have to fits with it. Another thing we would do, of course, at this point is we'd be calling up 118.15 to go ahead and get our weather for us. For me, I'd probably have called it up on the phone, depending, of course, what's going on. But if we did want to kind of go through the process, we would always go over to COM2, and this would be just kind of like standard procedure for us. This thing's just kind of happily bouncing along here. 118.15, we swap like that. We come over here and turn on COM2. Well, I think I should turn COM2. I'm too good. I had it on already. Too efficient. So what that would do, of course, is read us the weather over at Bradley. And it's going to come through all crackly and irritating because we're kind of in a low spot here. We wouldn't normally be able to hear it. I shut that off, I'd say I got my weather. One thing you want to know here, by the way, is notice our aircraft at idle here is sitting here at 5 degrees. This is a very, very nose-up plane. When you go to flare for landing, you will be pulling up to about 7 to 8 degrees. It's very, very steep nose. And again, the great thing about this is we have the nice G1000 with these lovely colors, and they did a really nice job on this, so it makes it a little easier. So that's all set. We're good to go. We got our weather. We have our flaps are still in the down position. We're going to be doing a short field takeoff today because of this airport. So, of course, we pop that to 20, and that'll give us plenty of lift. Take a look at my temps. Temps are good. Cylinder temperature good. Pressure's still low. Turbine temperature we haven't tested yet, so I'm not going to worry about it yet. So after doing all of that, getting your clearance, making your calls and everything, it'll be time to finally get in this kind of show on the road, so to speak. So this plane is a little weird. What you would do is you release the brake, and what it would do is as soon as you release the brake on this one, you can see I've released it, it would start moving forward. There would be no hesitation. It wouldn't be like, see how it's just kind of sitting here making brumbly noises? This plane would be like, gotta go, and it would just start rolling forward on you. So one of the things that Flight Sim doesn't like to do is they don't like to simulate that. Again, that much RPM is plenty. This thing would just go, and it would start picking up speed on you. And once it started moving, trying to get this thing to slow down would just be such a process. Excuse me, sir. Sir? Excuse me, sir. Sir. Oh, poor guy. It's like the 50th one of those guys I chopped up on one of these videos. So we're going to go to our little warm-up zone here. Of course, we won't always point our nose into the wind. One thing that Carinado did not get correct is the nose wheel steering on this plane. It is absolute doo-doo. The best way to describe these two pedals here are giant bungee cords. When I push this pedal forward, I'm not mechanically engaged with the actual front wheel. I'm actually squeezing a spring. But if you take a look here, you can see these kind of little, kind of bungees right there, kind of holding my rudders. That's what these things feel like. They're rubber bands, and they're absolutely terrible, especially compared to like a 172 or like a Piper Archer or something like that. But anyway, we'll go ahead and do a run-up. The first thing we would do, of course, is make sure that everything works. This looks good. We're going to confirm cowl flaps are in the open position. Pitch trim is good for takeoff. All that stuff is good. We are turbocharged, which means we have to expect the surge. And the best way to describe that is when we start to bring in some power here, which I'm going to do right now. We're going to come up to 1700 RPM. You're going to get the surge, and you're going to see what's going to happen here. I'll go back this out just a little bit. This is so much easier to control RPM in the real plane. It'll come down just a little bit. That's perfectly fine. So what we do now, of course, is we go cycle through everything. We can come down here to my key. We can set it to the left position. We should drop less than 125. That was like 50. That's not bad. We'll let it come back up. Come down to the next position. Looks pretty good to me. Looks not too bad. Next, what we do is we cycle the prop. When we cycle the prop in the real plane, you go like this. It goes whoosh. That's the best way to describe the sound effect. And the first time you get to try it, it'll do that. But the cool thing you should see here is the oil pressure should spike when we do this. And that's a little detail. See how it's dropping? It would go up, and then it would start to drop. It's actually interesting that they can only half get that detail. We're not carbureted here, so I'm just going to pull the throttle out and see if the engine cuts out on us, which it shouldn't or anything like that. Looks pretty good, and I just give it a little tap like that, and it should come right up to 1,000. There really should be no hesitation about how fast that accelerates there. We are ready to rock. Fantastic. So I'm going to disengage the parking brake. Again, this thing would just go, and we just don't get that sensation at all. And I push the pedal forward. Come on. I shouldn't have to do that. I should not. It should just go. It's just kind of one of those things that they didn't quite get right. But it's okay, because very few simulators ever get that effect correct. You'd really be surprised how much idle thrust an airplane has. So we're going to go ahead and approach the runway here. One thing I'm going to do is I just want to check my approach. Looks pretty good, too. I'm going to flip on my landing lights. Looks good to me. Landing lights. Come on, tap the brake a couple times to get ourselves. Whoa! This thing just does not handle like that on the ground, but that's okay. That's okay. I'm not here to review. I'm here to tell you my experiences with this plane. All right, we go kick it over like that. There's my runway. Obviously, any runway behind me is worthless. This is at Ellington Airport, by the way, the shortest concrete runway in Connecticut. I love it because I've flown this plane in and out, the actual 182 in and out of here, and incredibly, it is possible. This is a very impressive plane. So what we're going to do is we're going to go stomp on the gas. Rotates 55 knots there, and our VY, as you can see, is 95 knots. That's pretty typical for this plane. The one that I fly is in miles per hour instead of knots, so we're going to deal. So we're going to do standard takeoff here. We're going to confirm that our cowl flaps are open. We're going to confirm that the fuel pump is on. We don't want the engine cutting off on us at any point during takeoff. It makes this happy sound. It's not that loud, but it is loud in the real world. Autopilot's disengaged. I'm going to go ahead and check my controls. We always make sure they're free and clear. Listen how loud it is. Really? Really? It's all good. All right, let's go ahead and apply half power here. This is a turbocharged plane. So there's going to be two settings of power here. There's going to be the initial, get it set, make sure turbine inlet temperature is on. You'll see right now that we're basically not producing much boost at all here. We're actually not at all. Now what we're going to do is we're going to increase the power just a little bit. There's my turbine. That means the turbocharger is engaging. There's 30 inches. That's atmospheric pressure. Turbine temperature is good. RPM is good. I'm going to smoothly apply the rest. You're going to get a warning light, and we're going to let go of the brakes. Here we go. It only takes a few moments to get this thing going. Airspeed will come alive in just a moment. There it is, 21 knots. Very tricky to get this plane safe on the ground, by the way, because it's going to really, we're not wasting any time. 55 knots, let's go. Immediately going to pitch for our lovely little VX, which actually we can go even slower than this for VX, but that's fine. And we're just going to let it kind of sit here moseying. Now, when you have flaps down in this plane, this thing does not want to go anywhere. It's just going to, oh, just kidding, kind of a thing like that. And that's really important to know. So one of the things we're going to do is, because we're the newer 182, we can kind of cheat. We can actually bring up a single click of flaps while holding 7 degrees nose up. The plane will pick up some speed, and then we can bring up the rest of the flaps. The older 182s, you could not do that. You would have so much drag with that extra 20 degrees of flaps. It would go, oh, and then it would just sink painfully when you wanted to go ahead and kind of catch up. So that's looking pretty good. We got ourselves a nice little climb set in. I'm going to go ahead and give it a couple taps of up trim. Up trim on this thing is really, really easy. You don't have to trim it very much. Click that off, mostly because it sounds irritating, not going to lie. And now we're ready to go ahead and start proceeding on course towards our destination. There's our VY right there. Like I said, about 95 knots. In the real plane, 100 to 110 miles an hour is typically what we'd use on the 182P. But for this one, 95 is fine. This is very, very high power for us. So the next thing we want to do is we want to start backing us down to our climb power. Now that there's 1,000 feet underneath us, it's pretty much ready to go. I'll zoom in a little bit here. So it's always going to be power before pitch. So we're going to go ahead and back this out. We can go down as far as 28 inches is fine. And then when it comes to RPM, coming down to 2350 is good. You can go as low as 23. I'm a huge fan of 23 personally on this version. If you're flying, of course, the normal version, you'd be going down to 24 and 2450. That's considered kind of the safe. As long as we are in the green, we're good to go. And one thing we want to check, of course, is that everything else is looking nominal. Oil pressure is fine. Cylinder head temperatures are fine. The real 182, of course, you'd be a lot hotter than this, even though my cylinder head temperature is nice and safely kind of the upper part of that green there. Don't be surprised if it'd be quite a bit hotter than that. But you can see that this airplane, even though it looks a lot like a 172, it's just not a 172. It is easily climbing upwards, and you can see we're doing about 103, and my climb rate's almost 1,000 feet per minute, even though we're 700 pounds heavier, just to give you an idea of just how much performance this aircraft has compared to the other one. So as you can see, this is an absolutely awesome plane. They did a fun job modeling it, but of course, we're going to have to go ahead and pause our video here as we move on to the kind of cruising phase of this plane, which, since we're turbocharged, gets a little interesting. And of course, then we have to descend, then we have to put it on the ground. Enjoy.